Welcome to the Value Stuff Podcast. I am your host, Dan Glazier, and I am a personal property appraiser, and I value stuff for a living. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and share this podcast so we can grow it. Today, I'm really excited. I'm going to talk about a subject that nobody wants to talk about, and we don't talk about enough, but it's so important, and it's because it's death related. Nobody wants to talk about death or, even think about death, but it's very important, and I'm talking about the importance of having a will. And there are some crazy stats out there, something like, 50 to 60% of people in North America do not actually have a will. And I imagine there's even a higher percentage that, don't have a good will. So I want to get the word out there. It's like my public service announcement. I don't know why our lovely governments, they love to put ads and spend a lot of money on advertisements, spending our beautiful tax dollars, but none of those ads seem to be like the importance of having a will. So hopefully we grow and grow and grow this podcast so we get the word out there. So I've come up with 7 reasons why you need to have a good will. I'm not an estate and wills attorney or lawyer. This is just me giving some advice based on my experience of dealing with estates for over 20 years, probably 25 plus years. I've been dealing with estates. I appraise the personal property contents of the estates, all the furniture, all the artwork, all that stuff. And, the estates that are in disarray are the ones that do not have a will or do not have a good will. So I'm giving you 7 reasons here. So before I get started, I want to do a definition of a will. There's several different definitions out there, but they're all kind of the same. So I've kind of just sort of come up with this one definition I found that I think is probably the most accurate or the most simple anyways. So the definition of a will. What is a will? A will is a legal document that leaves instructions and your wishes about what you want done with your personal property and possessions after you die. So what are your personal possessions? Your personal possessions include all your real estate, all your investments, all your household contents, all your items like your cars, if you have boats or you have RVs or other, fun toys and things like that. Another important thing, which is more come up recently in the last few years, are digital assets. And you need to, those need to be included in your will. Like who's going to manage, do you want to keep your Facebook going or your Instagram, TikTok? You might have revenue streams from a podcast or YouTube channel, and you might want to pass those on or have other people manage those. Those are important things to be in your will, not just about, the obvious things like your real estate and your vehicles and things like that. So I've come up with 7 reasons why you need a will. There's a friend of mine she's a professional executor, and she has a great saying in her business. It basically says, do you want to leave landmines or leave a legacy? And if you want to leave landmines, the easiest way to leave landmines for your family is to not have a will. And if you want to leave a legacy, a big part of that is having a nice good will that lays out, your instructions on what you want done after you pass on. So here are the 7 reasons that I've come up with to have a will. And when I mean will, I don't mean just a will. I mean a pretty good will. You don't need a complicated will if your estate isn't that complicated. If you own a home and a car and you have a few small investments here and there, you probably don't need a complicated will. If your estate will be more complicated, then definitely have a wills and estate lawyer help you out. I'll talk a little bit at the end. There's also online wills that you can do, and then I'll explain a little bit about that at the end of this podcast. But here are the 7 reasons why you need a will. Number 1, very, very important. You get to decide who your executors are and who's going to manage your assets until they get distributed. And the executors are also going to manage the distribution of those assets. So you get to decide. If you do not have a will, The government is going to step in. They're going to decide who your executor is. And your executor might not be who you want to be, the person who manages your estate. They might hire a professional executor, and most of them are pretty good, but they might not do things the way you want them. So if you have a will, you put in it who your executor is, and you might have two executors. They might be, co-executors. You might do that, and they're going to carry out your wishes. And that's why you want to have a will and have the executors. So they're going to basically, they're going to follow your instructions, and those instructions come from the will. So that's number one. You get to decide who your executors are. Number two, by having a will and a good up-to-date will, you will save time, money, and stress for your loved ones. There is nothing worse than, to me, I see an estate and I see it's in disarray. It's very unorganized. There's nobody, people are saying, I was promised this and I want that. And it ends up in litigation, and so much money is coming out of the estate. And it's mostly, it could have all been avoided if there was a will and there was instructions in the will. So number two is you want to save time, money, and stress for your loved ones. And time's important because, you don't want, if you say you have, children in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and, you'd like them to get the fruits of your labor sooner than later after you've passed on so they can enjoy their life. So time's really important. Money is always important. And to reduce the stress is really important. So that's number two. Number three, you get to decide who gets your assets and your possessions, because that'll be laid out in your will. Again, if you do not have a will, there's going to be an executor appointed by the government, and they'll be the ones deciding who gets what, or it's going to go to, litigation, and then it gets decided that way. It's not decided by you. And I don't know about you, I want to be the one deciding where all my possessions end up and who gets what. So that's a good reason to have a will, is, you decide who gets what. Pretty simple. Number four, probably the most important thing of having a will, if you have children, and especially if they're under 18, especially under 16 or even younger, is you will have in your will your guardianship for your children. I know when I did my first will, I think I was in my mid-30s. I should have actually had it done much sooner, probably 5, even 10 years sooner, maybe in my mid-20s. It's not, to have my first will, because I started, getting assets in my mid-20s. But I didn't do my first will till my mid-30s. And the reason was my wife and I were going on a vacation, and we looked at each other and said, what if our plane crashes? You always think the worst case scenario. But we realized that we didn't have wills, and we wanted to make sure that we could have that peace of mind if we went away, that we were going to point the guardianship of the people we wanted to take care of our children, that we knew would love our children, provide them, the education that they needed and the guidance that they needed. So number four, probably the most important thing if you have children, is the guardianship for your children. Number five is almost important as number four. And to some people, it's more important, especially if they don't have children, and that is the guardianship and instructions if you have pets. If you don't have children, I know a lot of people that have dogs and cats, and they are like children to them. I have children, and I have a dog, and he is part of the family, and I want to make sure that if anything was to ever happen to me and my wife, my dog is taken care of. He's a rescue. We got him when he's 7 months old. He is an amazing animal and creature. He's well loved, and he's happy as anything, but he provides a lot to our family, and he deserves, if something was to happen to us, he deserves to still have that life. So I want to make sure that there's also guardianship and instructions for my pet. even, a little sidebar note here is you might want to not just put the guardianship there. You might want to allocate a bit of funds so your animal, is well taken care of. Vet bills aren't cheap. Good food isn't cheap. Grooming dogs and cats and whatever your pet is, it's not cheap. So guardianship for your pets is number 5, very, very important. Number six and number 2 are kind of, go hand in glove. But number 6 is you're going to lower the potential for disputes. I'm not saying, the reason I said lower, even a very good, estate with a good, well organized, sometimes they do get contested and they do end up in litigation. But if you have a very good will, the chances are much, much less that it's going to end up in disputes and end up in litigation. But if it does end up in sort of litigation, the judge and the courts, they, you have a nice ironclad will. They can look at it. They know what your wishes that you wanted carried out. And chances are they might not all be carried out, but at least most of it is because you have a good will. So number 6 is the lower potential for disputes, but also if there is disputes, it's going to make, solving those disputes much, much better because you had a good will. Number seven is, we don't like to think about this because we really are looking death right in the eye when we're thinking about this one, our funeral instructions. And, you might not want to be buried in this cemetery. You might want to be cremated. You might not want to be cremated, whatever. You put the wishes in your will and they'll be carried out, to the wishes that you have. I'm going to give you a funny story of an estate that I dealt with a few years ago. And it was just a family member shared this with me. There was a gentleman, he passed on, and he wanted to be buried at a certain part of a cemetery, in a certain cemetery. And the reason he wanted to be buried there, he did not want to be buried near somebody that had already passed on and they were at the other end of the cemetery, and he did not want to be near them. Just obviously they didn't get along, and he just did not want to be buried near this gentleman. The wishes were carried out. It was in his will. So these are the 7 reasons why you need to have have a will, an up-to-date will, and actually have a good will. So I'm going to go over them really quickly. Number 1, you get to decide who your executors are, and they'll carry out the wishes the way you wanted them carried out. Number 2, you want to save time, money, and stress for your loved ones. That's very, very important. Number 3, you get to decide who gets your assets and your possessions. You're the one deciding. You're not letting the courts or other, people you didn't appoint, distribute, your fruits of your labor. Number 4, very important, guardianship for your children. If you don't have a will, you're leaving it up to this, the government, the state, or however you want to call it. They're going to be the ones making that decision. I think I want people that I know are going to love my children and take care of the children, almost as good as that I would, or even better. That's number 4. Number 5, same thing with pets, guardianship for your pets and instructions for your pets. Very, very important. Number 6, you have a will, you have a good will, legal will. Make sure it's a legal document, and make sure it's a legal document will. You're going to have lower potential for disputes because you have a will. And if there is disputes, at least most of your wishes would likely be carried out because you have a good will. Number 7, your funeral instructions, whatever they may be. I didn't put that, I don't think, in my last will. I'm going to be updating my will. And I don't know. I have to think about this one, but I think I want to be my ashes scattered somewhere warm, and maybe it's because it's it's January here in Toronto, Canada, and it's very cold. Maybe I just want to be somewhere warm, but maybe that's where my ashes are. But anyways, number 7 is your funeral instructions, how you want to be buried, where you want to be buried, all that stuff. In closing, wills do not have to be complicated either. If you can do an online will, There's several platforms in Canada, the United States. You want to make sure that they are, become a legal document. That's what a will is. It's a legal document that states your wishes. You want to make sure it's nice and legal. But there's some really good documents out there. There's one in Ontario here called Willful, another one called, I think, called Epilogue. Um, I've just done a bit of research on them, and they seem, very good. They have good ratings and stuff. But do your own research. I am not a wills and estate lawyer. The one thing I do know is what's not good to have a good online will. If you have a blended family, maybe you're recently separated. You have a lot of different investments. You have property that's outside your state or province where you live in, or the country you live in, and stuff like that. You might want to use a wills and estate attorney. I'm going to be redoing mine shortly. I'm probably going to use a wills and estate attorney. Mine isn't that complicated, but I do have a few things here and there. But I probably would be just as well to do online. I'm personally going to use probably a wills and estate lawyer, but the most important thing is to actually get a will. Make sure it's a legal binding will. Check out make sure that the laws are different in every province, every state, different countries. Just make sure it's a legal will. But the most important thing is to get a will. Let's get those numbers up there. Let's not have 40, 50, 60% of people not having wills. Let's get that 80 and above, 90% and above. I'd love it to be 100%. That's probably not going to happen, but let's aim for the stars here. Thank you so much. This is very important to me. It's like my public service announcement. If you're going to share any, podcast of mine, share this one. Please, share, subscribe to this podcast. Have a wonderful week and get that will done. Thank you so much, Dan Glazier, The Value of Stuff. Thank you.